Spectrum, A Brief History of Modern India, Unit 3, Rising Resentment Against Company Rule, Chapter 6, People Resistance Against British Before 1857. Most of us think of the 1857 revolt as the first major show of resentment against the British who were represented by the rule of the East India Company. However, there were many incidents before the 1857 revolt that indicated all was not well, and there was a building resentment against the alien rule. The resentment manifested itself in several modes of resistance by different groups of people in different regions of India. People resistance meaning in the context of people's resistance against the British rule. The word people encompasses several sections of the Indian society who were affected by the alien rule. The peasants, artisans, tribals, ruling classes, religious leaders, military personnel, etc. fought for the protection of their interests, at times separately and at times together. The agitation in Banaras in 1810 against the house tax imposed by the colonial government, the Surat riots in 1840 against the salt duty, the rising of Bareilly in 1816 against police tax and municipal tax, are some examples of urban movement in which people from lower status like artisans, petty shopkeepers, and the urban poor fought together. With the prosperous urban gentry, the interest of these resistance differed in the sense that each section had different grievances but converged on a common objective to end the British rule. According to Bipin Chandra, people's resistance took three broad forms: civil rebellions, tribal uprising, and peasant movement. We have also considered military revolts as a form of people's resistance, which involved Indian employment in the company's force to make the study of people resistance more comprehensive. Genesis of people's resistance. In pre colonial India, people's protest against the rulers and their officials were not uncommon. Highland revenue demand by the state, corrupt practices, and hard attitude of the official being some of the inciting factor. However, the establishment of colonial rule and its policy had a much more annihilative effect on the Indians as a whole. There was one to hear their grievances or pay attention to their problems. The company was merely interested in extracting revenue. The colonial law and judiciary safeguarded the interest of the government and its collaborates, the landlords and merchants and many lenders. Thus, the people left with no option choose to take up arms and defend themselves. The condition of the tribal people were not different from those of the people living in mainland, but the encroachment by outsiders into their independent tribal polity made them more aggressive and violent. Causative factor of people's uprising. The major factors responsible for the people's resentment and uprising against the company rule are as follows: colonial land revenue settlements, heavy burden of new taxes, eviction of peasants from their lands, and encroachment on tribal lands. Exploitation in rural society coupled with the growth of intermediary revenue collectors, tenants and moneylenders, expansion of revenue administration over tribal lands, leading to the loss of tribal people's holder over agriculture and forest land. promotion of British manufactured goods, heavy duties on India industries, especially export duties, leading of devastation of Indian handloom and handicraft industries, destruction of indigenous industry leading of migration of works from industry of agriculture, increasing the pressure on land. Civil uprising. The word civil encompasses everything which is not related to defense military, but there we have included those uprisings which have generally led by deposed native rulers or their descendants, former zamindars, landlords, polygars in South India, holders of territory consisting of a few villages granted to them by the rulers, mainly the Nayakas, in return for military service and tribute. Ex-retainers and official of the conquered kingdoms, or sometimes by religious leaders. The mass support generally came from rag-rented peasants, unemployed artisans, and demobilized soldiers, although the centers of these uprisings were erstwhile power wielding classes. Major causes of civil uprising. Under the company rule, there were rapid changes in the economy, administration, and land revenue system that went against the people. Several jamindars and the polygars who had lost control over their land and its revenue due to the colonial rule had personal scores to settle with the new rule. The ego of traditional zamindars and polygars was hurt due to being sidelined in the rank by government officials and a new class comprising of merchants and moneylenders. The ruin of Indian handicraft industries due to colonial policies impoverished millions of artisans whose misery was further compounded by disappearance of their traditional partners and buyers, princes, chieftains, and jamindars. The priestly classes instigated hatred and rebellion against alien rule because the religious preachers, priests, pundits, malvis, etc., had been dependent on the traditional Indian and bureaucratic elite. The fall of zamindars and feudal lords directly affected the priestly classes. The foreign character of the British rulers, who always remained alien to this land, and their contemptuous treatment of the native people hurt the pride of later. General characteristics of civil uprising. These uprisings, in most cases, represented common condition, though separated in time and places. The semi-feudal leaders of civil uprising were backward-looking and traditional in outlook. Their basic objective was to restore earlier from the rule and social relations. These uprisings were the result of local causes, the grievances, and were also localized in their consequences. Important civil uprising. Sannyasi Revolt 1763 to 1800. The disastrous famine of 1770 and the harsh economy order the British compelled a group of sannyasis in eastern India evicted from land. These sannyasis were joined by a large number of dispossessed small zamindars, disbanded soldiers, and rural poor. They raided company factories and the treasuries and the fort of company's forces. It was also after a prolonged action that Warren Hastings could subdue the sannyasis. Equal participation of Hindus and Muslims characterized the uprising, sometimes referred to as the Fakir Rebellion, Majnun Shah or Majnu Shah, Chirag Ali, Mosa Shah, Bhavani Pathak, and Debi Chaudrani were important leaders